They said it was just a gift. A friendly gesture. A modern watch, sleek, smart, American, but in Ouagadougou, where shadows move faster than the news, nothing is ever just what it seems. Captain Ibrahim Traoré wore that watch for 2 days, then he took it off. Placed it on the table. And 6 seconds later, it exploded. Not a metaphor. Not a drill. A real detonation. Live. On air, and now, the question echoes across the continent: who tried to kill Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and why was it wrapped in diplomacy? If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global giants, if you believe that Africa deserves to write its own story, in its own voice, on its own terms, if you see the fire burning in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and know it's not just his fight, but yours too, then this story belongs to you. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand together. Because we are not just watching history unfold, but we are part of a quiet storm rising. And what once was whispered, is now being heard around the world. And that's where it began, not with the explosion, but with the silence that came before it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood in the gilded reception hall of Ouagadougou's presidential palace, smiling politely as cameras flashed. A U.S.A.I.D. official handed him a gift, a smartwatch, sleek and new. The crowd applauded. Traoré nodded. But behind his eyes, something flickered. He had shaken hands with enough foreign diplomats to recognize when a gesture was too polished, too rehearsed. The timing was odd. Just days earlier, he had delivered a fiery speech condemning neo-colonial interference. Now, this? A token of goodwill. He accepted the watch, thanked them, and strapped it on. But the moment it touched his skin, he felt it, not physically, but instinctively. Something wasn't right. The watch hummed faintly. Just once. A low, almost imperceptible vibration. Maybe it was normal. Maybe it was meant to connect to a phone, a satellite, a server. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't believe in coincidences. Not anymore. He didn't say a word to his aides. Just turned to the cameras, raised his hand, and waved. That night, he sat alone in his office. He placed the watch on his desk, stared at it under the lamplight. Then he reached for the intercom. Bring me Malik. Quietly. Malik was the head of cyber defense. Formerly a white hat hacker. Now loyal to one man, the captain. He entered the room with no questions, only a laptop and cold eyes. This is the gift, Traoré said. Tell me who it really came from. And just like that, the countdown had begun, not just for a bomb, but for the biggest betrayal Captain Ibrahim Traoré had ever faced. What came next confirmed every fear. Malik worked through the night. His fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes locked on the data streaming in from the dissected watch. To the untrained eye, it looked like a harmless gadget. But under the casing, things were far more sinister. The watch was transmitting signals. Regular pulses. Low frequency. Military-grade encryption. It wasn't connected to any health tracker or phone app, it was connected to a foreign satellite network. Malik paused. This isn't a smart watch, he muttered. It's a smart weapon. Captain Ibrahim Traoré listened in silence, arms folded. His jaw tightened. The file names embedded in the device's code weren't in French or English. They were code words used by intelligence contractors. Buried deep in the system, Malik found something worse, a dual trigger mechanism. One linked to GPS coordinates. The other to a countdown. Once the watch detected that Traoré was inside the press hall, surrounded by signal relays and a live media presence, the detonation protocol would initiate. There would be no beep. No warning, just 6 seconds, and then, nothing but smoke. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He stood, stared out the window of the presidential office, and said quietly, "They wanted a message. So let's give them one." His advisors begged him not to go to the press event. Security chiefs suggested canceling. Others whispered about blaming technical errors. But Traoré refused. He would walk in, wearing the same watch, in the same suit, as if nothing had happened. He wasn't just calling their bluff, he was flipping the entire table. The next morning, as dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the president rose without hesitation. That he adjusted his uniform, picked up the watch from its case, and slid it back onto his wrist. No fear. No trembling. Just fire in his eyes. Because Captain Ibrahim Traoré knew this was no longer about one man's life, it was about exposing the lie behind every handshake they ever offered. And by nightfall, the world would see what kind of aid Burkina Faso had been sent. And so, the trap was set, not by them, but by him. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. The hall was packed. Journalists from across Africa, Europe, and Asia filled the rows, their cameras already rolling. Flags of Burkina Faso hung behind the podium. Everything looked ceremonial, formal, controlled. No one knew what was really about to happen. Captain Ibrahim Traoré entered the room with quiet command. His stride was steady. His face, unreadable. He greeted a few reporters, nodded at security, then walked straight to the podium. On his wrist, gleaming under the lights, was the same watch, the very same gift meant to end his life. The room fell silent. He began with formalities. A few opening remarks. Updates on agriculture. Infrastructure. It was all normal. Too normal. His voice didn't shake. His hands didn't twitch. Only his eyes gave it away, burning, focused, waiting for the moment. Then, he paused. He reached for his wrist. Unstrapped the watch slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the table beside the microphone. Silence. Click. Click. Cameras zoomed in. 6 seconds later, the hall exploded into chaos. A sudden blast. Not massive, but loud enough to shatter glass and silence breath. Smoke burst upwards. Reporters ducked. Screams echoed through the hall. One camera fell to the floor and kept recording, shaking, catching glimpses of panic, running feet, falling chairs. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré never moved. He stood exactly where he had been, arms by his side, eyes locked on the crowd. The blast had missed him by inches. But the message? It had landed with deadly precision. Not just in the room, but across the world. Within minutes, footage flooded social media. Traoré survives assassination attempt, live, became the headline of the hour. Memes followed. Then outrage. Then disbelief. Who would send a bomb disguised as aid? Who would dare try to eliminate a president on camera? And who, exactly, was afraid of what Traoré might say next? The captain didn't wait. He stepped back to the microphone, leaned forward, and with smoke still curling behind him, said just one sentence. "This is what their friendship looks like." Then he walked off the stage. No panic. No press release. Just the raw, brutal truth exposed under studio lights and broadcast to millions. Captain Ibrahim Traoré hadn't just survived that, he had turned their plot into proof, their silence into guilt, and a cheap watch into the loudest message Africa had heard in years. And then the world caught fire. The explosion didn't just shake the press hall, it shook the entire continent. Within minutes, the video spread like a virus. Every news outlet from Al Jazeera to the BBC ran it on loop. Social media couldn't keep up, the footage was too raw. Too real. Too undeniable. People weren't just watching Captain Ibrahim Traoré survive a bomb, they were watching him stare into the face of death, and not blink. Hashtags exploded, hashtag Traore lives, hashtag Watchgate, hashtag US Assassin. Meme pages turned the destroyed watch into a symbol. One tweet read, "They gave him a time bomb. He gave them a timeline." But beneath the humor, there was rage. African youth began asking dangerous questions. How many presidents had vanished mysteriously? How many aid packages came with silent contracts? How much of what we call help was really control? In Ghana, students marched with cardboard watches taped to their wrists, chanting, "We don't need gifts. We need respect." In Mali, a billboard went up overnight showing Captain Ibrahim Traoré with the words, "Still standing. Still ours." Meanwhile, silence screamed from the other side. U.S.A.I.D. released a carefully worded statement, full of sorrow, void of answers. No mention of the watch. No mention of the explosion, just the phrase, "deeply concerned by recent events." The White House avoided direct comment. A reporter asked if the United States had sent the device. The press secretary replied, "We remain committed to our partnership with the people of Burkina Faso." No denial. No outrage, just distance. But the people weren't buying it. In Nairobi, a prominent journalist declared on live television, "This wasn't just an attack on a man. It was an attack on the idea that Africa should stand on its own." The story reached Europe too. French talk shows debated Traoré's accusations. Some mocked him. Others looked shaken. One analyst, usually skeptical, admitted, "If this is true, it's not just scandal. It's sabotage of sovereignty." And back in Burkina Faso, something had changed. The people were no longer whispering, they were shouting. They didn't just see their president survive, they saw him expose something that had long been hidden. In a single act, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had put a mirror to the world, and forced it to look. And what stared back was uncomfortable, undeniable, and utterly African. And then, he spoke. That evening, the nation waited. The footage had been watched, rewatched, slowed down, analyzed. People had seen the blast. They'd seen the calm. They'd heard the sentence. But now they wanted more. Captain Ibrahim Traoré appeared not in a studio, not behind a podium, but standing outdoors, in front of a scorched government table, the same one the watch had detonated on. No suit. No armor. Just his red beret, military shirt, and eyes that no longer held questions. Only fire. The speech wasn't long. Just 7 minutes. No fancy language. No diplomatic filters. They called it a gift, he began, but not every gift is meant for your good. Some are meant to remind you of your place. To keep you down. Quiet. Dependent. But we are done being quiet. He didn't mention U.S.A.I.D. or Washington. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew. Instead, he turned the camera's gaze outward. This is bigger than me. Bigger than Burkina Faso. This is about every African child taught that they must ask permission to stand tall. His voice didn't rise. But his words hit like a drumbeat. If standing tall is dangerous, then so be it. If choosing our own path invites enemies, then let them come. Because we will not kneel. We will not bow. And we will not die quietly. By the time he finished, people weren't clapping. They were crying. And the ripple spread. In Niger, billboards went up with his final quote, "We will not die quietly." In Senegal, graffiti appeared overnight, Traore speaks for us all. In Kinshasa, a youth group changed their name to the Red Berets. The captain had survived the blast. But more than that, he had transformed it. He turned a weapon into a message. A murder attempt into a movement. Across Africa, he wasn't just seen as a president anymore. He was something else. A symbol. A storm. A reminder that leadership didn't have to mean compliance. That sovereignty wasn't something given. It was taken, protected, lived. Western officials began to panic, not because he survived, but because people believed him. Because for the first time in decades, a young African leader had faced death with open eyes, and refused to run. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't just make it out of that press room. He walked out holding a new kind of power, not the power to destroy, but the power to awaken. And once a continent begins to wake up, no one, not even the ones with satellites and suits, can put it back to sleep. History doesn't always announce itself with trumpets. Sometimes, it walks into a room wearing a ticking watch, and dares the world to listen. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré placed that device on the table, he wasn't just confronting an assassination attempt. He was confronting decades of silence. Of manipulation. Of smiling faces delivering sharp knives hidden in policies, packages, and promises. That watch was never about time. It was about control. And when it failed to kill him, it ended up doing something far more dangerous. It revealed the truth. The explosion wasn't loud enough to destroy a country. But it was loud enough to wake one up. Traoré didn't rise from the smoke looking for vengeance. He didn't call for war. He didn't point fingers or demand reparations. What he did instead was far more terrifying to those who tried to silence him. He told the truth. Calmly. Boldly. In front of millions. And the truth spread. In towns and cities across the continent, people began speaking in a new tone. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. With memory. With pride. Africa, once talked about in boardrooms and backrooms, was now talking back. On its own terms. In its own language. Not because of a weapon. But because of a man who refused to be broken by one. Captain Ibrahim Traoré became more than a survivor. He became a mirror, reflecting everything foreign powers didn't want the world to see. Resilience, self-respect, and rebellion dressed in discipline. His red beret became a symbol. His silence after the blast, a statement. His presence, a problem for those used to puppets. Because now the world had seen it live. Not scripted. Not staged. A young African leader, standing tall, refusing to kneel, even when death was placed on his wrist. What happens next? That part's unwritten. But one thing is certain. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about every village that was told to wait, every leader who vanished in mysterious accidents. Every contract signed under pressure, every voice drowned in development. Now, a different voice is rising. Firm. Clear. Unapologetic. And if you've read this far, maybe you hear it too. Maybe this isn't just a story. Maybe it's a signal. That the time for silence is over. That the age of standing alone is ending. And that when the next gift comes wrapped in promises, we'll look twice. And we'll remember. Because the man who didn't die, made a continent live. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did more than survive. He made history. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré is more than a tale of survival. It is a profound lesson in sovereignty, vigilance, and courage. At its heart, this story reveals the dangerous gap between what is said and what is done in the world of international politics. Aid, cooperation, and diplomacy are often packaged as gestures of goodwill, yet beneath the surface they may carry agendas, expectations, and, in extreme cases, deadly intent. The watch, presented as a gift from U.S.A.I.D., symbolized this harsh reality. It was not just a timepiece. It was a warning of how far some will go to maintain influence over those who dare to think and act independently. This incident teaches us that sovereignty is not declared, it is defended, sometimes silently, sometimes at great personal risk. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not retaliate with force or accusation. Instead, he exposed the threat by letting the world see it with their own eyes. His choice to walk into danger, unflinching, was an act of strategic resistance. He used truth, not weapons, to fight back. And in doing so, he reminded the world that leadership is not about submission to power, but loyalty to people. The lesson here is also about perception. Many still believe that control today comes through war or open colonization. But in reality, it often comes through gifts, loans, soft agreements, and subtle pressure. Traoré's survival forces a question: how many other gifts around the world come with strings, or worse, triggers? His story breaks the illusion that modern imperialism is gone. It simply changed form. Another key lesson is about awareness and unity. Across the continent, the response to the failed assassination attempt was not just sympathy, it was awakening. Youth across Africa began questioning narratives, revisiting history, and reclaiming agency. Traoré's silence after the blast echoed louder than most speeches. It showed that sometimes, dignity can be more explosive than any bomb. Furthermore, the story teaches the power of narrative. Had the explosion happened in private, it may have been buried under reports and denials. But Traoré ensured it happened on camera, under lights, with witnesses. By doing so, he took control of the narrative. He turned a weapon into a microphone. He taught us that controlling the story is sometimes as important as controlling the battlefield. Lastly, the lesson is about fear, and what happens when someone refuses to give in to it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's strength did not lie in physical security or political backing. It came from conviction. From choosing to act even when it was safer to stay silent. His courage challenges others, not just leaders, but citizens, to ask what they're willing to risk for truth, justice, and sovereignty. In the end, the story leaves us with one clear truth. Africa is watching, learning, and rising. And thanks to leaders like Traoré, it is no longer rising in the shadows. Many viewers expressed disbelief and outrage after watching the video. For them, it wasn't just about the explosion or the assassination attempt, it was about what it symbolized. In the comment sections, countless people wrote that they had long suspected the hidden hand behind foreign aid but had never imagined it would be exposed so openly. The image of Captain Ibrahim Traoré calmly removing the watch and placing it on the table moments before it exploded left a lasting impression. Some called it the most powerful moment of political defiance they had ever witnessed. Others said it felt like watching a leader finally say what millions had been thinking, that Africa has had enough of false friendship wrapped in money and smiles. One viewer wrote that Traoré's courage reminded them of Thomas Sankara, but in a more digital and exposed world. Where silence no longer hides secrets. Another shared that their parents had lived through colonization, and seeing a young African leader risk his life rather than compromise made them feel a generational shift was finally happening. For many, this was more than a story, it was a spark. It reignited pride, and more importantly, it stirred the desire to protect what remains sovereign and pure within their own countries. Several viewers pointed out how quiet Western media had been about the incident. They commented that if this had happened in Europe or the United States, it would have been breaking news for days. But because it happened in Africa, to an African leader rejecting Western dominance, the world tried to look away. And yet, they couldn't. Because the explosion wasn't just caught on camera. It was shared. It became truth in motion. That truth, once seen, could not be unseen. Some audience members admitted they had never heard of Captain Ibrahim Traoré before this. But now, they couldn't forget him. His name, his stance, his silence in the smoke, all etched into memory. For others, he had already been a symbol of new African leadership, but this store